delegates in all. The math at the end of the night will determine how many candidates remain in the field and how likely it is that Republicans end up with a contested convention. Let's look at the math. Donald Trump enters Tuesday with a lead, 462 delegates. Ted Cruz in a relatively close second at 371. Then you see Rubio and Kasich. This is what happens if Trump runs the board on March 15th. Florida, Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, North Carolina. If Trump runs the board, he'll be up close to the ballpark of 800 delegates. At that point, forgive me, Republican establishment, the Trump train would become a runaway train. Stopping him would be near impossible. If Trump runs the board, ends up near 800 delegates, he would only need about 44–45% of the remaining delegates in the rest of the contest, easily achievable to get to 1237 by the time of the convention. But if John Kasich can win his home state of Ohio, that changes the math somewhat. If the map looks like this instead, then at this point, Trump needs about 55% of the remaining delegates. That makes the math a little harder, raises the stakes, the possibility of an open convention. Marco Rubio, if he can somehow pull off Florida, where the polls show he's trailing, but if Rubio can somehow win at home and Kasich wins at home, then the Republican establishment thinks we're going to an open convention, because then Trump would be right at the halfway point. But at this point, he would need more than 60% of the remaining delegates to clinch before the convention. Again, at this point, the Republican establishment thinks, okay, he's still the front runner, but we're going to stop him before the convention. He won't clinch. We'll have an open convention. More chaos. But Mr. Trump thinks the map is going to look more like a rout on March 15th. He thinks he's going to run up the numbers and win them all. He says any talk of him losing is foolish.
We're going to win at so many levels. We're going to win, win, win. You're going to get so tired of winning. You're going to say, Mr. President, please, we don't want to win anymore. It's too much. And I'm going to say, I'm sorry.
This Tuesday, we keep talking about these Super Tuesdays, but this actually is sort of the key round in a heavyweight fight. If Trump comes out on top Tuesday night, if he wins them all, pretty hard to stop.
It's hard to stop Marco Rubio. There's virtually no way he could continue if he loses Florida. You started to hear that in his voice in the last few days, saying that, look, Florida comes, then, you know, and if we don't win, Florida, you're going to win. You're the state that's going to decide the Republican nominee. And you're hearing a shifting of strategy, too. I mean, the Rubio folks are saying, telling voters explicitly, if you vote for John Kasich, you vote for Ted Cruz in Florida, you're voting to elect Donald Trump as the next Republican nominee. So we're getting to that moment, a real tipping point in this race.
But also they apparently said, listen, if you were in Ohio, you should vote for Kasich. The Kasich folks didn't want to reciprocate with the Rubio folks, so, you know.
But if you were making this point off the air, Jonathan, if Kasich wins his home state, he gets one state. Which is great. Yeah. It's an important state. It's a bellwether state. But if Rubio loses and Kasich wins, then Kasich suddenly becomes the vehicle for the establishment, even though he hasn't proven that he's necessarily a train with a lot of steam.
Right. The 1 for 25 candidate will then be the great hope of the Republican establishment, which tells you everything about this election cycle. But John Kasich and Ohio really are the linchpin to Tuesday. If you believe that Rubio is not going to carry Florida, and every poll suggests that he won't, what really matters now on Tuesday are two things. First of all, John Kasich carrying Ohio. And if that happens, and if Ted Cruz can make inroads in North Carolina, Missouri, and Illinois, kind of the orphan states on Tuesday that are all forgotten, but that all have delegates. If those two things happen, then I think the race will, in fact, go to a convention. Keep in mind, in the three states, Missouri, Illinois, and Carolina, that I just mentioned, 193 delegates on offer. Now, they're split, but that's more than what Florida and Ohio have. So don't forget those three states, too. And if Cruz can make inroads there, he can push this thing closer to a convention.
Right. Cruz spent all day yesterday in Missouri. I think he's spending all day today in North Carolina. It's a key point, because if you win by a decent margin, even though they're hybrid states, it's like South Carolina, where Trump won and got all the delegates. The margins are going to matter as to whether those delegates are split or not. And Cruz keeps saying it's a two-man race. He has to prove he can win some of these big states, too. So that's a fascinating piece to watch.
Yeah, and you see Trump in our debate on Thursday essentially saying, listen, the person who should win is the person who gets the most delegates. But, of course, there's this other sort of Operation Stop Trump going on that so far hasn't really yielded any results if you look at the results of last Tuesday. So, you know, we'll have to see what happens.
You mentioned the debate. The other candidates, it was very civil. Trump actually at one point said, wow, I can't believe how civil it is up here. Clearly, they understand this moment, and they didn't want to mess up the moment by having a negative debate or a nasty debate, because they understand how important Tuesday is. But all of the other candidates, especially Rubio and Cruz, did try to make the point, and it came up when Trump was asked to defend, and he stood by his comment to CNN's Anderson Cooper. He said, Islam hates us. Jake Tapper asked Donald Trump, do you want to back away or clarify? He said no. And listen here, both Cruz and Rubio said that is not the language of a president.
I know that a lot of people find appeal in the things Donald says because he says what people wish they could say. The problem is presidents can't just say anything they want. It has consequences here and around the world.
The answer is not simply to yell, China bad, Muslims bad. You've got to understand the nature of the threats we're facing and how you deal with them.
Don't you also have to not wait months to attack your opponent?
After praising him?
Look, I think there are a lot of people in Team Cruz who look back on this entire campaign from the beginning with a little bit of regret that he didn't go after him sooner, because that may have been a lot of what allowed Trump to come into a commanding position far enough into this campaign that he did then become unstoppable. That debate was such a perfect sort of microcosm of this whole race, right? You have a bunch of other candidates facing this collective action problem, none of them wanting to really directly take on the front runner because they've seen what happened to the others who tried to do that. They all got knocked back and pretty much eliminated. And then you have a front runner who feels increasingly assured and who sees the upside for him in trying to seem statesmanlike and not directly going after his opponents, not being vulgar or making the jokes that we've seen him make in the past. And so this may be where this thing is heading.
One thing I want to point out in that debate, he was asked by Jake Tapper, all the candidates were asked that if Donald Trump, if you don't win the necessary delegates, what will happen next? And Trump said that, even if you don't clinch, you don't get that magic number, you should become the nominee if you're the one who's the closest. Not everyone necessarily agreed with him on that front. That's going to be the real question going forward. Let's say Ohio goes to Kasich, Florida goes to Rubio. How do they make the case? How does the Republican establishment make the case that Donald Trump should not be the nominee? And what does that say to his millions of supporters potentially come the general election? That's going to be a real
Which
problem.
he kept mentioning, those millions of supporters.
I think the theme song for the Republican convention might be "Send Lawyers, Guns, and Money." Everybody sit tight. Ahead, Donald Trump says he's not to blame if things get testy when protesters disrupt his rallies, but many Republicans see lasting damage to a Republican brand that was already struggling with minority voters.